Good day, everyone. For Telesur, I'm Cody Weddle in Caracas, Venezuela. We begin in the United States in the aftermath of the release of the Senate Intelligence Committee CIA torture report. The 6,000-page report outlines the brutal interrogation methods used by the CIA to extract information from suspected terrorists after the September 11th attacks. Many of those who were subjected to the gruesome coercion had connection to terrorism. The report makes it clear that those were of human rights abuses. Even supporters of the government of former President George W. Bush, which oversaw the torture, have admitted that the techniques did little, if anything, to thwart future terrorist attacks.
And as the committee's report makes clear, it produced little useful intelligence to help us track down the perpetrators of 9/11 or prevent new attacks and atrocities.
For his part, current U.S. President Barack Obama admitted that the U.S. government had engaged in torture and that the revelations could put at risk U.S. embassies and consulates around the world.
Fortunately, as the Senate report shows, we engaged in some brutal activity after 9/11. And, this is an accounting of some of the problems that the CIA program engaged in. I know that there have been concerns about the release of this report and the potential dangers it poses. We've taken precautionary measures in our embassies and around the world. There's never a perfect time to release a report like this.
And we move now to Colombia. That's where peace talks between the government and FARC guerrillas are resuming in Havana, Cuba, after a suspension of the dialogue last month. This cycle of the talks will last until December 17th and will include discussions of a de-escalation of military actions. The FARC continues to advocate for a full ceasefire in the armed conflict, but the Colombian government of President Juan Manuel Santos has refused. The dialogue in Havana had been stalled following the FARC detainment of a Colombian general and other members of the military in mid-November. The government agreed to restart talks after the prisoners were released on November 30th. And for more now on the reinitiating of the peace talks, we go to our correspondent Charles Parkinson in Colombia.
Colombia's peace talks got underway again today after an almost 3-week pause following the capture and subsequent release by the FARC of General Ruben Dario Alzate. The reinitiation of the talks was marked by 2 separate press conferences given by the delegations of the government and the FARC in Havana, with government chief negotiator Humberto de la Calle denying that there's any secret agreements between them and the FARC, as has been claimed by Colombia's vocal conservative opposition. He also rejected a set of apparent FARC demands published by the figurehead of that opposition, Alvaro Uribe. However, we're probably going to see more vitriol coming from hardliners in Colombia following the FARC press conference in which Pablo Catatumbo denied that the guerrillas had ever committed crimes against humanity. Charles Parkinson in Bogota, Colombia.
Thanks to Charles. To Peru now, where the UN's COP20 conference on climate change continues discussing a new accord designed to replace the Kyoto Protocol. Heads of state as well as UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon addressed the attendees of the meeting Tuesday. Those attending represent 195 of the world's countries. Bolivian President Evo Morales criticized wealthy nations for their role in provoking climate change, as well as their lack of firm action in resolving the problem. And now to Mexico, where demonstrations continue in solidarity with the family and friends of the 43 students abducted in the state of Guerrero. The parents of the students are demanding a halt to the elections in the state scheduled for 2015, as well as a dissolution of public powers. Relatives say that the election should not go ahead while 42 of the 43 students remain missing. They add that the electoral contest will only act as a diversion from the real issues facing Mexican society. The demands were made at the Mexican Senate 2 days after the identity of remains of one student were confirmed by forensic experts. And for an update, here's Clayton Kahn in Mexico.
Marking International Human Rights Day, a group of 15 human rights organizations here in Mexico pronounced in a statement that the country has little to celebrate as it continues to struggle through one of its worst crises in recent decades with the forced disappearance of the Ayotzinapa students. Now, the groups pointed to what they say is the inability of the Peña Nieto administration to effectively introduce policies and practices that reduce dramatically the more than 20,000 disappearances as well as widespread violence. These critics also highlight that widespread impunity that continues to reign as most murders and kidnappings go unsolved. Meanwhile, in an interview yesterday, U.S. President Barack Obama said that his country could offer support and aid in investigating crimes such as the Ayotzinapa case. However, the U.S. leader evaded a question as to whether that support would be conditional for Mexican authorities to uphold, guarantee, and not violate human rights. This is Clayton Kahn reporting for Telesur here in Mexico City.
Thanks to Clayton. We go to Venezuela now, where victims of the violent street protests that left 43 people dead in February and March of this year presented their case to the Organization of American States on Tuesday. Here's our correspondent Rachel Boothroyd here in Caracas.
The Committee for the Victims of the Barricades has handed over a declaration to the headquarters of the Organization of American States here in Caracas, demanding that their voices be taken into account by the organization. Now, the committee was actually formed in November earlier this year in order to draw attention to the 44 people who were killed and the hundreds of people who were injured during the armed barricades which took place in Venezuela earlier this year in an attempt to overthrow the Venezuelan government. Now, last week the committee actually handed over similar documents to the United Nations headquarters here in Caracas, as well as to the Spanish and US embassies. They say their voices are not being taken into account by these various organizations who have prioritized defending the wealthy opposition leaders who are actually accused of having promoted the violence. Although the US Embassy and the UN did not appear to give much importance to the documents handed over last week, committee spokespeople say that they did in fact receive a more favourable response from the Organization of American States. I'm Rachel Boothroyd reporting for Telesur from Caracas, Venezuela.
Rachel Boothroyd in our newsroom this midday. We go now to the Middle East, where a Palestinian minister has died following clashes with Israeli soldiers. ZIAD Abdul-Ain was killed during a protest early this morning in the occupied West Bank. Our correspondent in Palestine has the latest.
Well, it was a usual peaceful protest that the activists in Ramallah are used to do every week in a way to protest the illegal continuous Israeli building of the settlements in the West Bank, and at the same time to protest the separation wall. Hundreds of activists joined the protest today. One of them is the PA member ZIAD Abdul-Ain, who is also the head of the Palestinian Authority Committee against the separation wall and the settlements, the building of the settlements in Palestine. The Israeli soldiers attacked this peaceful protest when the activists were planting olive trees in the area. They fired tear gas, and also they assaulted ZIAD Abdul-Ain by beating him with their helmets and the chest. The PA member suffered the inhalation of the tear gas. At the same time, he suffered a coma after he was beaten in his chest, and he died a few hours later after he was transferred to the hospital. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and another activists in Palestine, also Hamas officials in the Gaza Strip, Islamic Jihad officials in the Gaza Strip, PLFP and DLFP officials from all Palestinian political parties condemned this massacre, this attack on the Palestinian peaceful protesters today, and the killing of ZIAD Abdul-Ain.
And to Ukraine, where the hoped-for ceasefire talks between the government and pro-Russian separatists were postponed on Tuesday. Authorities initially said the peace was holding, but later in the day, a new shelling left at least 2 dead and several wounded. Both sides are blaming each other for the attack. Fighting in the regions of Donetsk and Lugansk this year has left more than 4,000 dead and hundreds of thousands displaced. The rebels have announced that they will participate in peace talks via a Skype conference call in the future. In the Philippines, investigations are underway about looking into whether insurgents were behind a bus bomb that killed 11 people. It left over 31 people wounded. The bus exploded this morning in the southernmost Mindanao region. Previous explosions in Mindanao have been blamed on organized crime, but the military believes terrorist groups are the more likely culprits in this incident. Finally, we go to Norway, where a man interrupted the presentation of the Nobel Peace Prize for Pakistani human rights activist Malala Yousafzai. The protester waved Mexico's flag and said, "Please, Malala, Mexico," before he was rushed off stage by security. Now, although his motives are unknown, the act was carried out against the backdrop of deepening social unrest in Mexico. For more than 2 months, nationwide protests have brought the extent of Mexico's systemic corruption to the world's attention. As always, for more on those stories and others, check out our website, telesurtv.net/English or Telesur English. I'm Cody Weddle.